So we are officially recording because I have forgotten a couple of times on these. So hello, everybody. Welcome to our second to last. What does that make this our 10th? I don't know. I can't count how many innovation events we've had this month. And this is another one that I am super excited that we're hosting because part of innovation is finding new and interesting ways to do things. And Annie Homsy-Harris has kicked off our diverse learning employee resource group and is going to help us figure out what innovative ways we can come up with to make working easier for our colleagues that have learning differences. So she's put together a pretty awesome show today, event.
Same difference.
And so I don't want to take up too much time, but thank you all for coming. And I'm going to hand it over to Annie.
Hey, everybody. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm super excited not only for our event today, but also to talk a bit about Learning Diversely, which is the newest member of the ERG family. And our goal is to not only change the conversations that we're having around people with learning disabilities, but also finding, as Abby very eloquently said, new and innovative ways to incorporate learning differences into the workplace and how we're engaging with people, because everybody learns differently, but not everybody is free to talk about things that they have, such as a learning disability. I can tell you from my own experience, it's definitely a tough road. You have to learn how to compensate and learn how to work with people and find innovative ways to even figure your own things out, let alone having to work with large groups and understanding how everybody needs to communicate and you need to communicate with. So our ERG is here to have that conversation, be a support for people who are either experiencing something like this or have children that are experiencing something like this. And so I'm super excited to be here and really happy that we're having this event. So our event today is to talk to Quinn Bradlee, who started something called friendsofquinn.com many moons ago. Sorry, Quinn. He started this group when I was, I think, almost out of college. And I've been a big fan admirer for many years. And so it's a wonderful organization that helps connect people with learning differences. And we'll talk about why we say difference versus disability today. And it also helps facilitate that conversation so that having a learning disability doesn't become quite as much of a stigma as it has been historically. And so with that, I'm going to show a really great clip. We have quite a few clips today. So I'm going to share this and we'll kick the party going.
My name is Quinn Bradlee, and I am the founder and CEO of Friends of Quinn. Thank you for being here so much. I really appreciate it. Are you guys ready?
Yeah, we're rolling.
All right. So, Stephen, what was it like getting honored by the Queen of England? You're one of the only people to win an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony Award.
There's 20 of us.
How does that make you feel, knowing that you have dyslexia? That leads me to my next question. What does the future hold for Tom Brokaw?
I want to spend more time with people that I really care about. You made the cut.
Do you have a different perspective now on life than you did before? What advantages do you think it has given you? How much do you think you are like the character that you play? What would you say to young people who are voting for the first time? Everybody told me, like, Quinn, wear at least a collared shirt. It's like, I don't think Tim Shriver is going to be wearing it.
I should be wearing a collared shirt.
In Dylan's case, he wants to be an actor. Dylan wants to be an actor.
I can see why.
Well, right.
What was the hardest time for you? What is one thing that our reviewers could help find stillness?
You have to just say, there's going to be 15 or 20 minutes of just quiet.
Can't say that to a 5-year-old, though. Sophie, thank you so much.
Quinn, my pleasure, baby.
Gavin, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Quinn.
Thank you so much.
Quinn, you are great. Thank you very much.
You're great.
All right, and with that, I want to welcome our guest today, who's Quinn Bradlee. Welcome, Quinn, to Morningstar.
Hello.
So we're super excited to have you here. Love that reel, by the way. Super fun. So can you just give us an introduction? Who are you? How did you get started in this crazy world of awesome filmmaking?
My name is Quinn Bradlee. I was born with 4 names, but I just use 2 of them. I'm the founder and CEO of Friends of Quinn and the founder and co-chair of Our Time, Our Vote. And I got interested in filmmaking because one of my godmothers at the time was Nora Ephron, who did movies such as Sleepless in Seattle, When Harry Met Sally, and You Got Mail, and other movies as well. So, and my parents had a lot of friends in Hollywood. So I grew up around that culture, and I've been on stage. I was in one of my godmother's movies, You've Got Mail. I was supposed to be on the scene in the train where the butterfly is getting out of the train, and we probably took about 10 takes of that. And then at the end of the day, she's like, "Yeah, we're not going to use you." So I was really bummed out. But I got my first check, $128.68. And it was one of the greatest feelings to have actually earned your own money. So that, inspired me to go off and try to make documentaries. I knew films was a little bit out of my league, Hollywood films, but I thought maybe I could just start with documentaries, and then that just oddly turned into me being on the other side of the camera, being in front of the camera and doing interviews, which oddly fits and ironically fits perfectly almost, because I never wanted to do anything with journalism at all, because of my name, because I have both my parents' names put together, and because of who my parents were and who my mother is. And I saw my eldest brother, Ben Bradlee Jr., he was the editor of the Boston Globe, and I saw what he went through having my father's name, and I just thought I didn't want anything to do with that. But as Sir Isaac Newton proves, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Um, so I'm doing a little bit of video journalism, I guess, in a way, just interviewing people, celebrities, politicians, but not just because they are who they are, to help people with disabilities.
So I'm glad that you bring that up, right? Because that's why we're here, to have this conversation. So can you talk to us about what your experiences are with having a learning disability?
Sure. So I was diagnosed when I was 14 years old with a syndrome called velocardiofacial syndrome, scientifically known as 22q11.2 deletion. And
Mouthful.
yeah, and it's scientifically, you have to say that to doctors, otherwise they won't really know what you're talking about. But it's also known as VCFS to George syndrome, Sprinson syndrome. I'm sure one day I'll probably be called Bradlee syndrome. But that's responsible for my dyslexia, for my ADD, for the tiny bit of hearing loss that I have in my right ear, for my terrible reading comprehension that I have, for my problem with navigation, which is funny because on my father's side, I come from a family of shippers, and they use nothing but maps and the stars to navigate with at the time. But it's, technology has helped me with that a lot. I remember learning how to drive without navigation systems, and I had no idea how I did that. I didn't go very far. I probably went around the block, and I learned the way to the farm, and that was the only place that I went. And it took me 14 tries to learn to get to the farm. And I remember, I actually remember there's this bay, not the Bay Bridge, but another bridge that you have to cross over a river. My mom was so terrified of going over bridges, she would actually embarrassingly make me pull over and get out and have my mom get in the driver's seat so she could drive over the bridge. And I did that till I was 16 years old.
Wow.
And it was just, and then when I started doing it, I started making my mom, just freaking her out. Mom, look at that over there on the bridge. Mom, look at that view. It's beautiful.
So you and your mom are pretty close.
Yeah.
That's
you
awesome.
Say that little,
Yeah.
we're not as close to the show as I Love a Mama's Boy, but almost that close.
Well, can you talk about what was the experience? When did you first know that you had a learning disability? And what was the experience of that diagnosis like for you?
Well, I knew there's something wrong with me almost as far back as I can remember, just because my mom would, let me know what I had and everything like that. And I'm glad she did. But I think the first time where I really realized I had something wrong was when I went to high school. And because that's when you really become self-aware. It's when you start to figure yourself out. And I realized, I'm having a little hard time here, but, and I had a really, really hard time my freshman year, but very ironically, I won the mathematics award at the end of my freshman year. And I ended up graduating from that school with honors with a 3.4 GPA. And I don't think I've ever seen my mom cry so hard in my entire life. But it's, it goes to show with the right help and the proper ways of teaching people with disabilities, especially learning disabilities, every child can be successful.
I completely agree. I think, but I think that also goes too into the workplace, right? So it's not even just how you teach children, but also how you interact and engage with people in the workplace, understanding that everybody thinks and learns very differently. And so it's really important to take that into consideration, as you're going through. For example, if you're showing a PowerPoint presentation, you want to make sure that you have it so that it's colorblind friendly.
You would show that for me. I wouldn't do the PowerPoint.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, do you think that people reacted to you differently once you were diagnosed, like your friends or your family? Or do you think it was, hey, we have an explanation now, let's just see what we can do?
I never really noticed too much of a change. I think because the friends that I have, I've known them since I was a kid, so they didn't really think too much of it. And I think now I could probably bet my paycheck that my mom probably told my friends' parents, this is what Quinn has and everything, and they probably talked to them about it and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I never really, it's funny because the hardest time of prejudicism, if you will, with my learning disability was actually at school, was at boarding school. And I went to a boarding school for people like me. And that's actually where I decided to write a book about it, because I thought that just wasn't normal. I thought that, you shouldn't be going to a school for people with learning disabilities, or as I personally like to call it, learning differences, because we just simply learn differently. We're not disabled. Especially when the teachers even get involved and giving you a hard time, that just, justice needs to be brought to that idea of teaching.
Did you find that there were specific tools or ways to compensate that really helped you excel in school and work and in any of the fields?
I loved Parents Weekend because, that Parents Weekend and the holidays is something that we always had to look forward to, especially when you're going to an all boys school in the middle of nowhere in Buffalo, New York, and it drops down to minus 25 degrees. One of my friends at this time had an extremely very cute sister. So I was always excited to hang out with them and to see her. But it's just, and for 4 years, I kept on telling my mom, this school needs to be integrated with females. It just, the all boy, I'm glad I did an all boys school because it's a tradition in my family for the boys to go off to boarding school and then college and come back home. But I think girls can help calm guys down a lot, just by seeing that there's other, they're not just men there, they're not just boys, because boys can be very, very, very rowdy. And I think the same thing with girls. I think it just helps even and calm everything down when both sexes are there.
It was like having that extra connection that helps.
Yeah.
Kind of calm the anxiety down and having that outside world connection.
I mean, women, girls were in a way medicine, if you will. When they came on campus, and the problem is that it was like, never having had alcohol, and then you're 21, and then you go out and you go crazy. If you have girls there, you're not going to go crazy. When a girl comes on campus, if there are already girls there, you're gonna be calm and chill out. But so for 4 years, my mom tried to talk to the school about going co-ed, and they changed the school. They made the school co-ed the year after I left.
Well, let me ask you something then. So how did the diagnosis of having a learning disability change your view of the world in general? Like, let's leave school aside, for a second and really talk about how, I know for many, the experience can be, I don't know how to approach the world. I feel like I'm a leper sometimes because I know I have this difference. How did that change your view of the world?
Well, I think anybody who is considered different by the society that we live in, just in general, worldly, globally, see the world differently. You don't take things for advantage. I had a problem with, independence, and I still struggle with independence. So my mom thought there's this program that she saw, and my mom was too scared of sending me away and blah blah blah. My dad was the exact opposite, as a dad should be. But so it was called Knowles, which is National Outdoor Leadership School, and it's the sister school to Outward Bound. I don't know if you've ever heard of them or not. But so I did. They have these programs. You could do a month long. You can do, I think you can even do almost up to a year or so. You could do hiking, kayaking, and different areas where they have them. And so I chose to do kayaking in Alaska for a month. And it was probably, it was probably one of the dumbest ideas I agreed to do. At the time, but and I almost backed out, but I asked him what would have to happen if I decided to leave. And because I was wet, I was cold, I was miserable. I felt like a wet dog on a cold day. All my clothes were wet, our food was wet, and we had everything stuffed in these duffel bags, stuffed into our kayaks. And by day 3, all of our clothes were wet, and we were there for a month. So
so you had to figure out how to interact and do all of these things while going through learning disability fun and being miserable at the same time. So that kind of heightened the anxiety for it and the experience.
And so the guy said, what we'd have to do is we'd have to get a helicopter to come in. We'd have to all turn around, and by this time we were already about 150 miles out that we had paddled to, And he said we'd all have to turn around, wait for a helicopter to air you out, and then, you know, take you to the nearest town, and then you get on that, go to airport, and then fly back home. And I was just like, I did not want to be that guy as much as I don't want to be here right now.
Right.
So I stuck it out, and there's one day where it was just pouring down rain. Just, you know, it's one of those places where you actually wear, and you have to wear a wetsuit, a dry suit. It rains there so much, just over your clothes. And my feet were wet, my feet were cold. I had great respect for my dad and my grandfather being, you know, in the military for 4 years, what they went through.
Right.
But,
do you think that experience though kind of, you know, helped you? I want to start transitioning into the career aspect of stuff. Yeah.
So I would say that, you know, we finally took a floating break, which is where you just dock all your kayaks together and you just float and you just snack. And we'd paddle about 12 miles a day or so. And we were just all miserable. And all of a sudden there was a whale that came up. And then about 5-10 more whales started coming up, and they were breeding. And they were making these noises, and they opened their mouth. We were so close to them. When they opened their mouth, you could actually see their tongue and all their teeth. And it was amazing. And, you know, it's one of the things that I've learned from it is that just because, you know, you're going through a bad time doesn't mean something good is, you know, and in the near future, something good is going to come out of it. And it's a great story to tell.
It's a great story. I love this.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought that up because we talked briefly earlier about your filmmaking career, correct? And we actually have a really cool reel. You know, if you guys haven't checked out Quinn Bradlee's YouTube channel, you can get there through friendsofquinn.com, but he has hundreds, right? Like 200 and something videos on there of interviews. Yeah, it's really cool. So of interviews that he has done, and Quinn was very sweet to send us a compilation reel of some of the three that we really enjoyed watching, we thought would really resonate. So why don't we take a look?
You first learned that I had learning disabilities. How did you respond?
I know this is a weird thing to say, but my first response was shame. I felt really ashamed, as though I had done something wrong. I was really relieved because you were 14 when we finally found out what the problem was, and you had been sick and had so many different medical problems that by the time we found out you had BCFS, I thought I was losing my mind because every time I turned around, you had something different. And when I realized that there are like 170 or 187 different ways that it can manifest itself, then I at least knew what was causing all of the problems, and it was something that we could deal with. And
dyslexia, of course, was the first thing that led me to realize that I was different. Although I didn't have a name for it, I just knew that I dreaded going to school. Because if I was called on, and I was told to stand in the front of the class and open my book and read from the book in the 3rd grade, that day would be another long day in a long series of the worst days of my life.
So when you got bullied, how did you deal with that?
I got bullied. I dealt with it by making movies.
Yeah.
I mean, making movies was my cover-up. But I never felt like a victim. That was the important thing. I never felt like a victim. I think movies really helped me, kind of saved me from shame, from guilt, from putting it on myself when it wasn't really, you know, my own burden. It wasn't my burden. And I think making movies was my great escape. That's really how I was able to get away from all of that.
Do you wish that you were diagnosed earlier than you were?
Yes.
Why?
Because I wish I had somebody helping me to understand that there were many, many others like me. And I just know I'm still slow at reading, but I've learned to adjust. I just don't, I read often, but I'm very, and here's a great thing also, I have great comprehension in what I read because I do read slowly. I retain almost everything I read. I don't just skip over things. And I'm able to appreciate the writing. I'm able to kind of really savor good writing because I really take my time going through a book or a script.
If you look at like online learning classrooms, they help people with disabilities immensely because it's repetitive, it's recorded, you can re-engage it. And I know someone like with dyslexia, sometimes you don't quite hear everything the way that it's supposed to come out, right? You're sitting there and you're like, I'm pretty sure what they said was not right. Yeah. Having that online classroom component allows you to re-go back and examine that and really identify how to excel.
What do you think the future holds for technology and kids, students with learning disabilities? Do you think it'll be different for them or easier even?
I mean, I hope so. I think that's what we're all doing here, right? I mean, we're all trying to work for that. I know that's what I'd like to dedicate my life to, is making.
I just love that. It's so cool to see the diversity of people that you've gotten to meet with and the range of experiences that you've had. So let me ask this then. How has filmmaking influenced what else you want to do in your life? And are there other things that you are taking an active role in your career?
So right now I'm interviewing members of Congress, how they feel about voting, especially just right now with, the grave times that we're living in. And just so, and I'm interviewing members of all Congress about, how they have a plan, how to have a plan, how to make a plan, what is their plan, how they should go vote, what do they think the future of voting is, how do you think history will look back on this moment, and just why we should go vote. And it's just something I think is very, very important. And with the family that I've come from, they go back to the American Revolutionary War and before. Some of them were involved. There are 4 brothers that were involved in the Boston Tea Party, which a lot of historians say that is what actually sparked the American Revolutionary War. I have a lot of members that were on the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which was the very first battle of the American Revolution, but nobody knows who shot the first shot. But, just coming from a family like that, who has always done what they think is right for their country, I thought the least thing I could do was to help people with disabilities stand up for them and to show them how to help them go vote.
So that brings us to Our Time, Our Vote, right?
Yep.
So we have another video clip that I'm going to play for our awesome group that's here that talks about that. So here we go.
I have dyslexia, dyscalculia, and ADHD.
I have nonverbal learning disability and a traumatic brain injury.
30 years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed to protect the civil rights of people with disabilities.
So many people with disabilities came to Congress and showed members of Congress what they could do as a result of thousands of people. They got an overwhelming vote in both the House and the Senate. Elections make a difference.
1 in 5 Americans who have the right to vote is someone with a disability. They want to fight for their right to vote.
They've been told that they either shouldn't vote, can't vote, or don't deserve to vote. All of those are untrue.
We have the power to change our material condition.
Because we need more than talking.
We need champions for disability rights in our elected offices.
For people with LDs, voting can be tricky, and COVID-19 has only made it harder.
Voting is the power we have in the United States to let our voices be heard.
We need to be involved in the political process.
Voters with disabilities should not be turned away from the polls.
NCLD is here to make sure your voice is heard.
I'm voting absentee right here at home.
I encourage you to bring your friends to the polls.
It will make the world of a difference.
2020 is our time.
Our time to be heard.
Our time to be visible.
Our time to stand together.
Our time to vote.
I get choked up at that video clip every time. I think it is really important to talk about how it is difficult for people who qualify under the ADA, right? People with disabilities, whether they are learning disabilities or physical disabilities, however, that is laid out, it is really important that we all kind of come together and how we can help each other. And one thing that I know we had touched on a little earlier is the difference between disability and difference. And I know that's something that you are extremely passionate about, Quinn, and something that we also advocate for the Learning Diversely group. So, can you talk briefly about why is it important that we differentiate between a disability and a difference?
I think it's because when I think of disabilities, I think of the military. I think of military machinery breaking down and being disabled. When they break down, for example, when a tank breaks down, if somebody shoots a bazooka at its tracks, that tank can't move anymore. It's disabled. People with learning differences are not disabled. We can still move. We just learn differently. We do things differently. We think things differently. I even, a couple of years back ago, I even read 2 articles that said that if you're born with dyslexia, you actually have more of a chance of becoming a millionaire than those without.
That's awesome.
You have to think outside the box.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right? That's true. People with learning differences really do have to think in a different way, and they have to innovate how they interact with other people or how they accomplish their tasks. Yeah. So actually, we're getting some Q&A. And by the way, anybody who has questions, please feel free to write them in. We love it. So Quinn, we have a question from one of our attendees. On applications, you often see questions about voluntary self-identification of a disability. I usually opt out of answering, but wondering if you could share some thoughts, pros or cons, on these types of questions and how they're used.
Unfortunately, I actually have no idea about that. It's the application. What's the question again?
Yeah, so when you're applying for a job, or when you're applying, and you have to voluntarily self-identify as to whether or not you have a learning or a disability of any kind.
I think actually you don't have to do anything. I don't think I don't know too much about the law about that, but all I know is that when you do fill out one of those forms, you have the right to go in and say, I have this and I need that, and I have this, and so therefore I need these. I need these things to accompany me so I can do my work better.
Do you think, though, that asking the question itself, what are the pros to asking and what are the cons to asking that question at all?
Well, I mean, they're pros and cons to living, the way I look at it. But, the pros, as everybody knows, is that, you might be looked at weird, or you might even be snickered at. I don't really think that is the case too much anymore, because I think we live in a society now where everything is constantly changing, and people are rising up to have their voices heard. So I think now, especially now, if you say, I have this, and people, when something doesn't go somebody's way, now they just get their phone out and just start recording and put it on YouTube, and then that person is fired. And I don't think that's exactly the right way to go. I think the story can get confused and mixed around a lot, but if you get made fun of, that's not good either. And that should be reported 100% if you get made fun of. But you have the right to have all the accommodations that you need to make your work life easier and more comfortable.
I definitely understand. And I think that the pros and cons from my perspective are, the pros are, well, if you identify and you utilize that portion of the application, then you're at least able to say, yes, okay, I notified everybody ahead of time. But the con is that There is still so much stigma around what it means to have a learning disability, as it is called. And the reason that, some history behind that is the reason it's called a disability is so that you can qualify for protections under the American for Disabilities Act. And in the state of Illinois, for example, if you're under the age of 18, in order to qualify for the ADA and accommodations, you have to be retested for a learning disability every 3 years. When you're over 18, you have to be retested every 4 years. So it can also be cost prohibitive. So there are pros and cons to self-identifying. So it is something, I think it's a personal choice for sure. And I agree with Quinn on that. It's 6 to 1, half dozen of the others sometimes, but I also think the way maybe that we approach it could change as well. And maybe approach it less like, hey, if you have this, then you're checking this box. More like, hey, we want to accommodate all learning styles, people from all walks of life. So if you do have any needs for accommodations, let us know if you feel comfortable, kind of thing. That would be my take on it.
One of the things that, to your point, I've interviewed Congressman Steny Hoyer, who signed the ADA, and I'm about to interview the person who wrote it. So, and perhaps I can talk to him about this on the side, but I do plan to eventually on my own time, or if anybody's willing to be there with me, I do plan to go there with the people who I've interviewed, if they're willing to go and testify before Congress and says, this word disability for people with learning disabilities needs to be changed to learning differences, because people with disabilities who are actually disabled and who have a hard time getting around is a completely different category than people with learning disabilities.
Yeah. So I have another question that came in, which is, do you have any tools or compensation techniques to help with anxiety as it pertains to ADHD specifically?
I used to joke that I was a drug addict in high school because I've been on all the drugs. I took Ritalin, I took Adderall, I took Dexedrine. That was mostly to help with acne. But, back then they would put you on Ritalin like that without even really checking, or they'd ask you a few questions, but they'd just say, sure, okay. They wouldn't really scientifically diagnose you back then. And then you say, oh, well, this isn't working. I need something else. Okay, you can try this. Even though the Ritalin would not be out of your system yet, they just keep giving you drugs. Now we know that it takes about 6 months, about 6 months or so, for medicine to completely be cleansed out of your body, if you will. So, or actually, I think now that they think it's even 2 weeks, because I take Effexor right now, which is antidepressant for mild antidepressant, and my doctor said, and I thought, well, maybe I could up it a little bit, see if that would help me. And my doctor said, let's wait 2 weeks. So I think it's at least 2 weeks before the medicines will start working, or you can just, think about changing it.
And I also read that, to avoid taking any medicinal, obviously sometimes if you need that extra help, that's completely fine. But, I know for members of my family, exercise is a really great way to help people with ADHD. It helps focus the mind. It eliminates anxiety. So I think there are other ways to utilize if you are scared of just going that medicinal route. But again, there's nothing wrong with anything. You can try a combination of anything, and I think it would still be great.
As much as I really don't want to agree with you on the exercising part, you're 100% right. I
know, especially since winter is coming.
Oh yeah,
right.
And I think especially this year is going to be very, very hard
Yeah.
And, I think if you get even a treadmill or a bicycle, and some weights, even if you only have one or two machines, I think that'd be a very, very good investment for this year.
I agree.
Now,
So,
you can also turn it, I'm not going to say their names because I don't know how controversial this is, but you can also go to plants to help with their problem. And even though that's a very controversial subject, it has helped before.
I have heard of herbal remedies, whether they be that or maybe natural oils and essences and things like that as well.
Yeah.
So I guess what's next for people with learning disabilities? Where do we go from here? How do we be that change that we want to see?
So I always say when people ask me that question, what's next? I say what's next is we keep fighting the battle. Otherwise, we're still in the trenches, and we need to get out of the trenches, and we need to just think about what our next maneuver is in a way. Otherwise, if we just all give up and stop, there isn't going to be a what's next. And I think because I have the family that I come from, and I really hope I'm not the only person that comes from a family like me who's in my position. If there are other people out there, I really hope they join me and do the same work. But I think I feel like in a way almost I've been chosen to help and to get people like me out of the rut that they're in. And at first I wasn't sure that I wanted to do it, but then I realized, that's like your parents saying, well, I'm tired of raising you. I'm not going to raise you anymore. So, or if you're hungry, go figure it out yourself. And I feel that I can't do that. I feel like I need to, make them some food or something like that and warm up their bellies.
Right. We have another question that just came in. This one is addressed to me. Annie, you referenced anxiety quite a bit. Can you either speak to how anxieties are related to learning differences? I'm not personally aware. How has there been an increase or decrease in anxieties with virtual work from home? Is it better or worse? So Quinn, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with this one. And so I would say, I think it depends on the person in terms of the better or worse aspect. I think it depends on your type of learning difference, better or worse. I know for me, I don't have a ton of anxiety working from home because I have all of my nicks and knacks. And when I'm at work, I also don't have a ton of anxiety because I have my safe space at my desk, right? So that's just how I personally feel it works for me. I could go either way. I do think that there is a level of connection that people sometimes need. And when for some people with learning disabilities, you can't read facial expressions or social cues. And so when you're working virtually, it can increase that anxiety because you really don't understand what people are saying or how they're interacting with you. And I also think that can lead to misinterpretations of things. But I think, again, that's a great question. I think that anxieties, depending on the learning disability, can increase or amplify some of the, I don't want to say symptoms, but I can't think of a better word right now. Some of the ways that your learning disability can manifest. So being anxiety aware and conscious of the fact that other people might be experiencing an increase in that, and maybe explain things in a different way, or they say, hey, I don't understand, I've asked this question 5 times, it's still not clicking. Maybe think of a different way to come at that question or come at that request, because it could be that their anxiety is kicking into a point where they're not fully understanding what's going on. I don't know, Quinn, do you want to add to that at all?
You took all the words right out of my mouth.
It's a great question, you guys. I love it. Keep them coming. We still got time. So
I interviewed Senator Bob Casey the other day, and
cool.
I had my first question. I asked him my first question, And he answered all my other questions for me. I was like, all right, interview's over. I mean, I asked my questions, just because I felt like I kind of had to, but it's, I just thought, how is he going to answer this question when he just answered the question for me? And he answered it in a completely different way. And I was just like, this guy's the biggest politician I've ever met, because that's what politicians do. They
answer all the questions.
Yeah.
I'm really glad.
How are you, politician? You actually answered my question.
But I mean, it's really good that people ask questions, right? I mean, especially when it comes to something that is so unknown. When we were coming up the ranks, when it was so unknown, even now, at least we still have a name to it, at least there's some kind of, hey, we can at least look and see, wow, what is that and how that's affecting your brain. So I think that's really, really great. Great question, Mike. Is there an interview or person that completely surprised you?
I mean, right off the bat, I want to say Steven Spielberg. One, he's the biggest name in Hollywood, and if not one of them in the country. And I've always knew he was a down-to-earth guy, but I finally talked to him one time at one of my parents' parties, and he just surprised. We ended up talking about a half an hour, and people were trying to, pull him and grab him, nudge him, and he just stood right there next to me, talking to me. And it was just that attention that somebody finally gives you, that they actually are interested. And I didn't know it at the time, but I think, he really wanted to talk about it. And I think he felt that I was a person that would understand him, that wouldn't make fun of him. And he's just a down to earth person, doesn't take anything for granted. But the other person who I was very surprised about was Sir Richard Branson, the billionaire, the British billionaire. And he was, I didn't know what to think at all, but I did the interview and he was telling me the story of where he started this company from nothing. He has this $1 billion company, and he had no idea between the difference of net growth and net worth were. And I was just like, how can you not know that and start a business, have $1 billion business? And he said, I read all your books about business, and I still don't understand. So one of his coworkers said, he finally said, okay, come here. So he drew a picture of a bunch of fish, and then he drew a net. And he said, the net is your net worth, your net growth, and then the fish are your net worth. You put them together, and again, that's your net growth. And then just from a picture, he completely understood it. Mm-hmm. And that's how a lot of people with learning differences, that's how they think. They're very visual. And ironically, but not ironically, but very ironically, I say Spielberg is, when you direct, you don't have to read, but you have to read a lot of scripts when you want to become a director. Mm-hmm. And some of them are like that thick, and it's just, how do having 2 kids, I can't even fathom trying to take any time to read a script that's that thick, right? Especially with dyslexia.
Yeah,
I'd be, like a drill sergeant telling them to shut up and go somewhere else.
Yeah,
I'm trying to work here.
We have another anonymous question that just came in. As discussed, some folks don't share that they have a learning difference, right? So what should neurotypicals do to accommodate their colleagues without forcing people to disclose that they have a learning difference?
I think this is very controversial. It's almost like talking to something that has a victim, somebody who's been a victim of something that they have a tragedy that had happened to them. And, you have to work your way into talking and make that person feel comfortable with you, make that person be able to trust you. And everybody else is different. I came from a family that were they were the opposite of introverts. So, my parents had been growing up going to parties all the time, all their life, work parties, whatever you want to call it. And my parents always, especially my mother, always made sure I went to those parties. And it was probably the greatest thing that my parents did for me, because I saw and I studied how my parents talk to people. I saw how they talk back to them. I learned, what to say to people, what not to say to people. And my mom, coming from Savannah, Georgia, and her mom coming from Savannah, Georgia, and the rest of her family coming from Georgia, she grew up in the deep South, and I knew that about her. But my mom just invited everybody of color over to, she always told me, it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter what type of problem you have in this life, and everybody is equal. And my dad almost died as a kid from polio. My mom almost died as a child from, doctors think till this day that it was from stress, because my grandfather was fighting on the front lines of Korea, and people, American soldiers, were just dropping like flies. So she was in the hospital for a year with a tube stuck in her, because she couldn't eat, because the minute she ate something, she would throw it up. But
so it was about equal treatment of everybody,
yeah,
not singling people out.
So, because my parents almost died as children, they knew what it was like to be different. My dad wore braces for a year on his legs. Because of that experience, he saw that everybody he didn't see anybody with a problem.
Right.
He saw that, nobody has issues. You just talk to them like a normal person, no matter what.
And I think that's exactly right. That's the answer, right? So, from my experience, I think the best way I can describe it is every person has their own individual, unique language. They operate, how they interact. And something that I think that we don't always, just as general society do, is take into consideration learning everybody's unique language, because that's a lot of time and a lot of effort. But when you can learn how someone interacts and whether they have a learning disability or not, then you're understanding how their interactions are, and you can compensate around or work with, or however you want to describe it, because you've now spent that time, that extra effort to learn that person. Yeah. And so I think we have to operate less under the assumption of, hey, what if this person has a learning disability, and what is that person like? Yeah. How do I interact with you in a way that I can see that you need? And that's a very difficult thing to do. Not everybody can do it. So I think it's something that we have to learn how to do. I know I've learned how to do it. It's not something I could do at the beginning. And it's something that I continue to learn how to do. But I think taking that time and really getting to know people on how they interact in their language, regardless of learning disability or not, is a great way. And also it builds trust, right? It builds trust with your teams. It builds trust with how you're delivering things. People know, okay, I understand how this person, if it's me, I understand that Annie can be quirky or, say sarcastic things sometimes, but that's not, just her. This is just how she works. So I think that's a great question.
I'm sure people have said you're quirky before.
Love it. Okay. Wow. So there's one more question. There's one comment, which is great. golden versus platinum rule. The golden rule states that you should treat others the way you would want to be treated, while the platinum rule shifts the focus a bit and says that you should treat others the way they want to be treated. That's a great point. But how do you know how people want to be treated is the question. And that goes back to the original, you have to learn the language of people, I think. That's how I help.
My mom, she always, whenever she saw me upset, she always, since I was a child, ingrained that philosophy into my head about the golden rule. And she always said, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, she, you know, and it's just, my parents grew up and they were so far ahead of their time in so many ways, as old-fashioned as they were and are. They were just so far ahead of mentally of how people thought. I mean, my mom's grandfather actually helped slaves, you know, after during the Civil War. And, you know, there weren't too many people helping slaves back in those days. This was somebody from Statesboro, Georgia, you know, from the deep South, helping slaves, helping people of color trying to be free. So, you know, my mom saw that, and my mom's mom saw that. My great grandfather taught my grandmother. My grandmother taught my mom taught me. And, you know, it's from the same side. My grandfather, on my dad's side, he was a golden boy, came from a society known as the Boston Brahmins in Boston, Massachusetts. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they were basically the elite class of Boston. And he had everything. He had absolutely everything you ever wanted. He had maids, he had butlers. He lost everything overnight. And he went to from being, you know, the president of a bank to making, you know, just thousands and thousands of dollars to mopping train cars so he could sell, you know, feed his family. And, you know, he taught that to my dad, and my dad taught that to me, that no matter what type of family you come from, we're all equal.
So we have time for one last question. So one quick answer, right? Because we're at time. So what film has most inspired you?
Jeez. That's the
last one, Quinn.
That's like, what's your favorite song? There's this movie by Wes Anderson called Life Aquatic. And that is one of the movies that oddly, for some reason, inspired me to become, to make films about documentaries. Because, you know, in the movie, they say that making documentaries is all about filming the now. It's all happening. And, you know, Hollywood, they try to capture that. They really, really do. You know, they'll read a book, or they'll base a movie off a book, and they'll say, you know, based on true stories in a lot of movies before they open. But documentaries, you don't have to say based on actual events. They are the actual events that's unfolding. And coming from a historical perspective, I grew up in old houses. I grew up, my parents loved antiques. And so you're capturing history with documentaries, because the making of a movie, of a documentary, everything that's happening now, tomorrow will be history. So if you capture now, you will capture history. You can share that to your children and so on.
I think that's a great note to end things on, because we are at time. But thank you both so much, Annie and Quinn. This has been a really great conversation.
Thank you, Quinn. Yeah, this is great.
Quinn, I appreciate everything that you're doing with Friends of Quinn and Get Out the Vote. I think you're doing a lot of great work. Keep going, keep on keeping on is the phrase that I've been saying, I think, at all these events.
Show dirt.
And again, thank you to all of our attendees who stuck around. I I hope we all learned something, even if it was a little bit differently. And we will have one more innovation event this Friday. Michael Jancy is going to talk about his innovation journey in his entrepreneurial life leading up to Sustainalytics and now his plans for Morningstar. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll catch you at the next one. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.